So for me, Spain versus Germany was the highest caliber game we've seen at the World Cup so far, both technically and tactically. These teams are very modern and bear strong resemblances to elite club sides, so it did have the feeling of a Champions League game as much as a World Cup one. So today I wanted to dive into that tactical battle, but I'm not going to go crazy with it. More interestingly for me is what we learned about these teams at this early stage and how they might adapt going forward. So let's do it. The key difference between these teams were their defensive philosophies. We already know how Spain set up on the ball, and if you don't, I encourage you to pause this and go watch my preview video where I discuss it in depth. But in response, Germany effectively mirrored their 4-3-3 with a 4-2-3-1, and I'd call this a very compact mid-block. The defensive line is actually very high, but their pressing isn't super aggressive. You can see that they've only got one man to press, for the sake of man-marking all of Spain's midfielders and forwards. That leaves one of Spain's defenders free, plus the keeper, which generally gives them comfortable possession in the back line. Germany are essentially flooding bodies into the middle third of the pitch, saying, come on then, try and pass your way through this. On the flip side, Spain were their usual aggressive selves off the ball, pressing Germany's back line man-to-man and then continuing that press onto the goalkeeper, and long story short, they either failed to play out from this, or went long without too much joy. And there you have the story of at least the first half. Spain were, as usual, committed to high possession, high control, probing for gaps in that compact German mid-block, but not taking any real risks. Meanwhile, Germany struggled to hold onto the ball for very long, but were happy to keep Spain in the first two-thirds of the pitch, leading to high possession stats for the Spanish, but few real chances for either side. So this is where I'm going to veer off and focus on each team individually, starting with Spain. And in general, Luis Enrique will be pretty happy with this performance, because for long periods, Spain achieved their number one objective, which is control. And that really came from their patience. Against such a well-organised team, they're man-marking all of your midfielders, cutting off passing lanes, you're not going to find big tactical exploits, so it's reasonable to be patient and wait for those subtle moments where you can find an advantage. For example, your centre-back might step up and carry the ball past his marker, giving you a man advantage in the middle, this 3v2, which ultimately led to Spain's first chance of the game. Another example, Asensio as the false nine drops deep, drawing pressure away from Pedri, and Germany are committing so many bodies around the ball that you can really open it out into space. And along the same theme, if your centre-back has space, they can look up and switch it out to your winger, bypassing this hugely compact shape and putting you in a dangerous 1v1. But none of these were regular trends, they really were just moments. And that's credit to Germany for their defensive discipline, because despite 64% possession, Spain's field tilt, which only measures possession in the final third, was only 53%, so a lot more even, and they weren't frequently turning deep possession into final third possession. But Luis Enrique wouldn't have minded that too much, because he knows that no matter how disciplined that German shape is, the longer the game goes on, the more chance of defensive lapses. And that's exactly what happened with the goal. You can see Germany are slightly deeper, and Gundogan for once isn't tight enough on Busquets to stop him from turning. From here, it's actually the exact triangle rotation that we talked about in our tactical preview, so that makes me feel pretty good. The fullback pushes up, the winger comes inside, the midfielder drops back, and because of that moment's disruption, Olmo can receive in space. Kehrer, the fullback, can't press him because of the run of Alba, and Alba then has enough time to put the cross in. There couldn't have been a more textbook Spanish goal, and it's extremely difficult to defend against. So you could argue that, until that point, the Spanish game plan was perfectly executed. However, I think there are two things Luis Enrique will reflect on as areas for improvement. Number one happened after the goal. So Spain actually shifted to the same shape that Germany had used in the first half, a 4-2-3-1, with Koke and Busquets in a double pivot, and he took Gavi off. And that led to a much less aggressive press, essentially trying to see out the game. And he even brought on Nico Williams to hit Germany on the break. Interestingly, the tactical battle after the goal was the complete reverse of before it. Spain in the 4-2-3-1 allowing Germany possession, and Germany started pressing much more aggressively, forcing Spain into turnovers. Effectively, Luis Enrique had conceded control, and it really ended up backfiring. I think in the same position again, he might go for a different approach at 1-0 up. But the more fundamental issue with Spain here, the second problem, was unfortunately what we alluded to before the game, their lack of cutting edge in the final third. And this is the value of playing a compact mid-block against Spain. They might be able to play through you. They'll drop in a false nine to create numerical advantages and open up the ball into space, but they're not devastating once they're in that space. So here, after Asensio has dropped deep, you're pretty short on numbers higher up. You don't really have the opportunity to create passing combinations. It's more about what players can do with the ball at their feet. And that isn't the strong point of the Spanish attackers. The same goes here when the ball is spread out wide. Ferran Torres and Dani Olmo as well are just very hit and miss in these 1v1s. I've covered Barcelona a lot on this channel, and despite playing an almost identical system, that team has been very successful against defensive high lines. And that's because they have a player like Ousmane Dembele, a winger who is supremely effective at attacking space and beating defenders. Spain don't have that, so against a compact mid-block or high line, creating a lot of threat actually becomes a problem. Again, they might play through you, but can't always take advantage of the space in behind. Which is why this is absolutely the best way to play against Spain. And we'll see if Luis Enrique can come up with anything to change that. But with the players at his disposal, it could be a problem. But anyway, that's Spain covered. Let me know what you think of their performance in the comments. And let's move on to Germany. With Germany, I sense a bit of an identity crisis. Defensively, I think they're pretty well organised, and I have no problem with their approach in this game. They contained Spain for long periods, but then turned up the heat in the second half and took away some of that Spanish control. But offensively, I feel they're caught between ideas. For me, against Spain, you really have to play one of two ways. One, bypass the press completely by going long, getting a focal point up front, get players around them, win knockdowns, and exploit that high line directly. Or two, come up with a very considered way to play through the press. And that's probably going to involve a lot of width in the back line, dropping players in to create numerical advantages, and isolating Spanish players rather than allowing them to be compact. A great example, if you're interested, is how Real Madrid set up against Barcelona in El Clasico. But in this game, Germany really did neither of these things. Neuer was going long pretty often, but they effectively had no physical presence to make it stick. They weren't even playing a centre forward, remember? And so Spain picked these off pretty easily. And they were also far too narrow in possession if they wanted to play through them. Musiala, who was brilliant, was drifting into central areas, so there was no wide threat to stretch Spain, who could be very compact off the ball. That's not to say they had no moments at all though, and by the end of the game, they'd actually created more than Spain and could have probably won it. Part of that was the tactical shift, so they started pressing higher and Spain became a bit more conservative, but more importantly, it was down to the substitutions. And from a German perspective, this is definitely the biggest takeaway from this game. You've got to start Sané. He came on and completely changed the game, because all of a sudden, it's extremely risky to press man-to-man and leave him 1v1 with the fullback. He's drifting inside and driving towards goal, he's playing 1-2s, he's the perfect partner for Musiala, who wants to play a lot of short passes and then make runs into the box. Sané can find him. So as two number 10s, this takes the creative power of Germany to another level. It also helped having an actual centre forward, because you've got all the movement and interchanging already. There's no point playing a false nine, you just need someone to put it away. And so I wouldn't be surprised if this was Flick's go-to setup from now on. However, there is an interesting question in midfield, because if you're going to go for that more traditional setup with a centre forward, two wingers, Musiala as a 10, then you've got to make a big decision about your pivots. Can you risk playing both Kimmich and Gundogan at the cost of leaving out a proper destroyer? I think it depends on the opposition. Certainly against Spain, having Goretzka or someone like him is hugely important and will probably be against top opposition. It just feels so bad to leave out one of these seriously elite players in Kimmich or Gundogan. So it's a tough one, and I'll pose that question to you guys. Assuming Sané and Musiala start as sort of dual 10s and you want width on the other flank, how do you configure your midfield? I'd be really curious to hear your opinions. So that's all for today. I hope you enjoyed. I don't often analyse two teams in the same game, so I hope this was alright. And if you did like it, consider subscribing to the channel. We've got plenty more of this tactical content coming through the World Cup. So hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Take it easy.